It's very easy for Satoshi not to, get identified. He just won't engage. He won't talk with documentary field crews. He won't come to conferences in person. Many people try to research, look at all the emails, look at all the forum posts, and trying to deduce something from a digital footprint for 15 years and found nothing. Because people are fascinated about who Satoshi might be, I think it's important for people who, are involved in Bitcoin and understand the Bitcoin mission to talk to them, because they will talk to somebody, and, if you don't talk to them, maybe some influencer has got an altcoin he's about to release, talks to them, and then that will be, a bad representation for Bitcoin. Pierre obviously denies it, and I believe him. There are a number of reasons why, people in the technical community would think it's not him. The sheer fact is that Satoshi stopped interacting on the forums in 2011, which is a really long time ago. Many people try to research, look at all the emails, look at all the forum posts, and trying to deduce something from a digital footprint for 15 years and found nothing. So we're probably never going to have any kind of digital proof. And all that's left is, kind of speculation about people who were interested in electronic cash before Bitcoin, or proof of work, or participate in Bitcoin development, in the last, from the early days or more recently. And of course you can construct a kind of speculative pro and con for each person. And there are dozens of such people, right? So I think it's all speculation at this point.
You're one of the first people that received an email from Satoshi. So, that doesn't mean that you know who it is or you have a better idea of who it might be because you received direct correspondence with him. But it is very interesting that you are literally one of the people that interacted with Satoshi, and all these years later, you actually don't care that much. And that's my next question is, does it even matter who Satoshi is at this stage if Bitcoin is running the way it does and it's becoming as mainstream as it's becoming?
I think it's actually, convenient or good for Bitcoin that it doesn't have, an eccentric or strident founder type of person, because I think the average person's intuition is to look for a leader or project. And some projects do have, loud and vocal and maybe obnoxious or eccentric leaders. Like, Elon Musk is a bit of an eccentric character with Tesla and now Twitter. And, Linux system, which is a huge open source project, Linus Torvalds is a bit of a firebrand and, swears at companies and has, aggressive views on different topics. Whereas Bitcoin, its mission is more about being adopted as a kind of global fabric and electronic money, and with no kind of founder type of figure involved, it helps it feel more like a discovery than a startup or an invention, right? So I think that's good for the concept of Bitcoin as a commodity. It's very easy for Satoshi not to, get identified. He just won't engage, He won't talk with documentary field crews. He won't come to conferences in person. And I'm pretty, fairly confident that it's nobody that's been talked about. So it will probably remain a mystery.
Vitalik still remains like a kind of central cog to what Ethereum has been doing. And I think he tried to pull away in recent years, and now he's become a bit more involved again, kind of giving a bit of direction. Is that a detriment to what they're doing, or do you think it matters that they have someone who's so involved and so directional in where that blockchain ecosystem should be going?
It's impossible to kind of recreate Bitcoin because, it bootstrapped from nothing organically when people didn't expect it to. And now there's an incentive for people who want to kind of imitate that to start a kind of pyramid scheme almost, right, where they will take some investor money, do some marketing, and sell the coins. And so, that's one of the dramas that, each of these kind of foundations, and they're almost like startups or companies, really. They have CEOs, they have a marketing department, etc. But they're massively dumping coins on their early investors, and then people get disillusioned. And there was a period where there were 10,000 altcoins and then 20,000, but apparently, I wasn't tracking, but apparently, including the meme coins, there are now literally 3 million or something, right? There's so much kind of immediate like insider pre-mines and aggressive dumping on the retail speculators, that all of the retail speculators lose money and then they get sick of it. I think Bitcoin is the only kind of digital asset that makes sense as a commodity that's plausible, that could be adopted by serious investors, by offered as an ETF or invested in by a sovereign wealth fund, or mined by a country. And I think the mining is a necessary part of the hard money. Like, you need actual physical scarcity to properly kind of sort of behave like gold in that sense.
Well, you seem interested in allowing people to use Bitcoin to make payments, but at the same time, you've just said to me that its fundamental value proposition is that it's digital gold and it has hard money properties. Can it be both?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you need both, because effectively the fundamental value is the ability to save for the future, which means spending in the future, and it's still having a value, retaining value over the long term. And of course, Bitcoin is volatile because it's undergoing an adoption phase. Eventually it should get fully adopted to the point where everybody who wants an allocation has got the allocation they want, and then you get some kind of probably lower volatility, people are thinking. But at the same time, you really need the two forms of spendability as in ability to use your savings in the future, and also spendability in terms of Bitcoin's ability to be a very low barrier to entry global electronic money, because there are many people in the world. It's hard for us to lose track of it because we have reasonably good banking services, debit cards, credit cards, and like mobile banking apps on smartphones and things. But for much of the world, they don't have passports and identity papers to get a bank account. If they did have, they don't really trust the local banks in some kind of unstable countries for good reason. Like, they're not very trustable. And so it's difficult for them to participate in a global economy. The introduction of Bitcoin in some of those countries, like El Salvador as an example, actually allowed people to leapfrog from paper cash straight to sort of peer-to-peer electronic money without going through the banking trusted intermediary phase. So I think one target for Bitcoin adoption is, as well as the growing usage as electronic money, is for it to compete with gold and get somewhere near gold parity. And I think that's getting pretty close. My theory, which is just a theory, we'll see if it plays out, is that, if Bitcoin starts to get closer to gold, and that, that becomes a story on the financial news networks, that you might see, an acceleration in the outflows from the gold ETFs into the Bitcoin ETFs, so that it could pull down and meet Bitcoin, so the parity actually becomes lower. So that could accelerate it.
US elections are coming up, and as you said, we haven't quite reached the part of the bull market that we spoke about in January of 2024. You've got Bitcoin ETFs and everything now. Do you anticipate a lot more upside in 2025, 2026? What are your general thoughts of the election in that?
Some of the more institutional, larger investors that might want to join in the Bitcoin market are waiting for the election uncertainty to pass, so that whatever the outcome, that would get that uncertainty behind them, so that then they could make the investment. So some anticipation of that. Yeah, so I think it just needs a catalyst now to get people started. I think there is some positive reflexivity, because if the price is higher, the people doing mining don't need to sell as big a proportion to cover their power costs, so that immediately takes some selling pressure away once the price is higher. The other positive thing we've seen is that the ETF buyers, which are not that big a percentage of the market, but they are sticky. They don't panic sell, and I think that's because somebody with a portfolio, they're not day trading. They're calling a broker, they're making a decision, and they leave it there for they make an allocation, they make a decision, and they leave it there for 3 years plus or something, right? So I think that we didn't know beforehand how they would behave, but they seem to be long-term holders, which is good for the market structure. Yeah, so I would expect to see a lot higher. Like, it's still early in this cycle if you look at it compared to percentage movement from the market bottom on previous cycles. And there are new entities who are, buying lots of Bitcoin, right? I mean, MicroStrategy, doing lots of convertible notes at the market. They are probably, if they had approval for $2 billion at the market selling, they sold and announced $1.1 billion last month. They have another $900 million to go. And based on the rate they were selling in the market and buying Bitcoin, was about 40 million a day for the first part. Tether has said that they are, they have a very good profit margin from the interest in all the treasuries, 110 billion of other people's money. So they're using a reasonable proportion of that retained profit to buy Bitcoin for their, not for Tether, but for the company cash reserves and treasury. And then we get some catalysts. I think the next catalyst could be that some of the bankruptcies are gearing up to pay out now. So the Mt. Gox one started. People worried that would result in selling, but doesn't seem to have. I think people just cold stored the 20% of coins they got back, and then the FTX is coming, and that's all cash, right? So they will be paying out 16 billion, which is a lot of money in Bitcoin terms, right? Those 1 or 2 billion selling sprees over a few weeks were moving the market. So if 16 billion comes back to Bitcoin market and crypto market investors. Now, we don't know exactly how they're going to react, but presumably some of that will come back and buy back coins. Now, they'll be disappointed, obviously, because FTX bankruptcy, super ill-advisedly sold them in a bear market and pushed the price down, and now they're forced to buy back and push the price up. But, they might prefer to be back in the market than being out of the market, because then you miss out, on the next cycle, right?
Adam Back, thanks so much for your time. It's really great to pick your brain on all things Bitcoin.
Thanks for having me on. It's good conversation.
Thank you.